Good evening, everyone. I'm Vajrakant, MBBS batch of 24. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone present over here at distinguished dignitaries. Dr. Jagdisha, former HOD Surgery JIPMER, Dr. Dinkar Pai, former Professor of Surgery, Dr. Amrit Das, retired CTVS surgeon, Dr. Premnath Raman, Professor of Ophthalmology, and all our JIPMER faculty present over here. Dr. Dinkar, Dr. Amit, and Dr. Premnath are here to celebrate their 50th year reunion as they're from the batch of 1975. A physician is obligated to consider more than a diseased organ, more even than the whole human body. He must view the man in his world. Good evening to everyone present here. It is my honor to introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Anil Nanda, a name that stands tall in the world of neurosurgery. Dr. Nanda is a global leader in skull-base and vascular neurosurgery, renowned for his exceptional skill, innovation, and dedication. He has served as the Chair of Neurosurgery at Rutgers and as Senior Vice President of Neurosurgical Services at RWJBarnabas Health. Over the course of an extraordinary career, he has performed more than 18,000 surgeries and authored over 560 peer-reviewed publications. And what makes today even more special for us is that Dr. Nanda is one of our own, an alumnus of JIPMER from the 1975 batch. A proud graduate of this very institution, he stands as an inspiration to every student present here. A Harvard-trained public health scholar, Dr. Nanda has led several major neurosurgical organizations worldwide. His pioneering contributions to skull-base surgery, aneurysm treatment, and neurosurgical education continue to influence clinical practice across the globe. What truly sets him apart is his belief that every patient deserves safe, effective, and compassionate care. His philosophy blends surgical precision with empathy, empowering patients and families throughout the journey. Today, we are truly privileged to welcome a surgeon, a scholar, a teacher, and above all, a compassionate healer. We welcome you, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real honor and privilege to be here. I was one of you guys sitting in the back there, okay? And Dinkar will attest that I used to sit in the back and I used to fall asleep. So there's hope for you if you're a backbencher. You turn out pretty good. But it's a real privilege to be here, and I want to thank all the dignitaries that are here. This is very emotional for me. You know, I was a young lad here 50 years ago, and, you know, all I wanted was I'll become a doctor and I'll take care of people. I never knew I would be so blessed. And I think the blessing comes from being educated in one of the finest institutions in the world. Never, ever forget how blessed you are to be a member of JIPMER, okay? This is a phenomenal educational place, and we were extraordinarily blessed to be trained here. I mean, we worked hard, and I think one thing I'll tell the younger students is that your brain will work on 12 cylinders here, and it will never work that well again. When I remember the 7 years I was here, I mean, I would read Bailey and Love, we'd be studying, and I studied for the neurosurgical boards, but it wasn't the same. And that beautiful period when your brain is going on 12 cylinders, you will reminisce on this 20 years later saying, what a great cerebral adventure it was. And so I feel very privileged to be here. You know, I think one of the great things about our culture is that we say Matru-deva Bhava, Pitru-deva Bhava, Acharya-deva Bhava. And I think I would really like to salute all the great teachers we had. Professor Ramurthy was, you know, we used to do Sashtang Namaskaram to him. He was a neurosurgeon, and I was privileged to give the Ramurthy oration last year in Chennai. And then I think Dr. Chandrasekhar, Dr. Vailya, both of them, they were sort of the Bollywood couple of JIPMER. They were just glamorous and wonderful. And Dr. Mazumdar, may his soul rest in peace, who just passed away. And of course, my parents and my guru, Sai Baba. So I was very, very blessed. And I think living in Pondicherry was a dream. I was from Delhi, and I was like, where is this Pondicherry city? And I made lifelong friends here. This is the city of Life of Pi, and Arjun and Deepthi are there in Oroville. They're really good friends of mine. So it was a wonderful time to be here. And I think at a time when we talk about Indo-US relations, we should think of all the great leaders America has produced with the ethnic background that we are fortunate to know. So my talk today is about this wonderful journey that started in JIPMER. And I can only stress how incredibly blessed I was to be here, that it germinated a career that was formed in the cauldron of Dhanvantri Nagar, that this place led to all this that I was blessed to perform. You know what I mean? That would not have been possible. So I want to talk a little bit about history, equanimitas, failure, because I just want to tell all of you, even at my age, you get rejection, okay? You think you've written a great paper, and they'll reject the paper, or you'll be in line for something and you don't get it. So how you handle that is very important. So I think as medical students, you need to develop resilience. You will get blows, things will go wrong, but how you recover from that defines your character. And that's, I think, failure. And then, of course, jnana is knowledge. And I think that knowledge that you're acquiring here at such a breathtaking space, you'll never acquire knowledge at that pace ever again in your life. So revel in it, because your brain is going on 12 cylinders, and you're going to be the brightest, best because of that. And then I want to talk about service, compassion, of course, the joy, because this is a joyous journey. You are entering the portals of one of the finest professions in the world. You will practice compassion, you will be excellent in what you do, and at the end of your life, you're going to say, what a great blessing it was. Oh, this went off? Yeah. Sorry, yeah. So I think when you look, I'm going to talk a little bit about neurosciences. So in Greek mythology, Hephaestus cracks open the skull of Zeus, who has a bad headache, and he delivers Athena, the goddess of wisdom. So if you are an obstetrician, you're going to say, this is the god of obstetrics. If you're a neurosurgeon, you're going to say, well, Hephaestus was a neurosurgeon. In the Egyptian mythology, the spine was supreme. They didn't care about the brain. They thought the spine was where everything emanated from. And then, of course, in our own culture, I would say Lord Shiva, if you're a Shaivite, was the first neurosurgeon. So if you say Har Har Mahadev, that's sort of the history of Ganesha and a head transplant. And then when you look at the original surgical skill sets that start, I think this keeps going off. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I won't do that. Is the Toomey. You can look at the baggage, Toomey baggage, and this is where the craniotomies were performed in Peruvians. And we know craniotomies occurred 10,000 years ago. Sadly, they were mainly in young women as a cure of insanity, and we know people survived because the edge would heal. So if you look at this right here, the edge has healed right there. So that was a good way to see what was going on. And then the skull, I'm kind of fascinated with the history of the skull. So the skull was a symbol of death, okay? And it starts with this line, sic transit gloria mundi, that life is brief. And the word they would use is memento mori. They would show a skull and say, think of your death. So this is Mary Queen of Scots, who gets this watch that says memento mori, think of your death. And so, this is there in all philosophies. And if you look at the crucifix in Western art, you'll always see a head down at the bottom of the crucifix. And that bottom, that's Adam. So it's kind of interesting how that comes about. And then in contemporary art, you'll see the skull is always is depicted by all artists to design that. And then in our own culture, you'll see Durga has skulls around and Lord Shiva has skulls because they think he's Kalatita, that he is, conqueror of time. And in the Western tradition, they would say in the Old Testament, vanitas vanitatem omnia vanitas, that it's all vanity. You know what I mean? So I tell that to neurosurgeons. Your H-index or the books, it doesn't mean anything. You know what I mean? People can say all these are it's all vanity. And so I think that's something, and then again in contemporary art, the skull, whether it's Andy Warhol or Basquiat, they always showed that. And I kind of like to collect skull art because I think it's a little professional allegiance there. But I think I want to switch quickly to equanimitas. This was a very, very important concept in medicine. I think if there's one thing you learn as a med student here today, go armed with what is equanimitas. Okay, this is Osler. Osler, to me, was the Gandhi of medicine. He was an amazing man. He practiced wonderfully, and he had on his graveyard, he said, I taught medical students. Education was key for him. And he says that the physician must have equanimitas, you must have imperturbability. And our Indian Prime Minister from Andhra, he said, Ma bhaya ma samvikta, which in the Upanishads is neither triumphant in victory nor despondent in defeat. So you will have clinical outcomes that don't go well, and you have to bounce back from that. And you will have triumphs, and you shouldn't be too proud because God will bring you down again. And again, this is the whole equanimitas thing that I think is very important. Now, it's very interesting. Osler was sort of the Gandhi of medicine, and Halsted was the father of surgery. I always feel if the roles had been reversed, surgeons wouldn't be that arrogant or that moody, because Halsted would not have got privileges in a medical hospital today because he would have failed the cocaine test. I mean, the guy was doing cocaine and morphine, so he would not have passed a drug test. But Osler was a good guy, and so it's a very good book if you want to read Genius on the Edge. You know, Halstead operates on gives a blood transfusion to his sister, takes out his mother's gallbladder on the kitchen table. So like a really fascinating guy. But I think we need to talk about failure. You know, we live in a time, this is social media, they put likes, they put dislikes, this. This was in the Wall Street Journal, How to Stop Hospitals from Killing Us. And they said every hospital has a HODAD, Hands of Death and Destruction. Sort of a mean thing to say, but this is the lay press talking about this, and I'll talk a little bit about malpractice. Those are issues. Now, this is from the Institute of Medicine that 100,000 lives die because of mistakes in hospitals, and bad things happen at hospitals. And we need to be cognizant of this. We can't have a God syndrome that everything I touch is great, I have great outcomes. No, we all have mistakes. And this is another great book. You know, the most dangerous part in the Victorian era during the British Empire, and the sun never set on the British Empire, was not, you know, Crimea, it wasn't, you know, Simla or Calcutta or Kenya. It was the hospitals of England that at the highest infection rate. You walked in there, you died of an infection. Obviously, Joseph Lister changes that. And I think, you know, we have had mistakes. You know, we used to do lobotomies. I mean, lobotomies were done 25, and they were unfortunately done on women more. So there's people who will go to mental asylums and perform 25 lobotomies with an ice pick right through the eye, anesthesia, and they would switch this in and out. It was one of the crying shames of medicine, and we as neurosurgeons did this. So again, it's important to know about our history and the mistakes we've made. Now, I've been very blessed to have done over 18,000 operations, and I think there's an Italian word by Castiglione, the art of effortless mastery. Those of you who go into a surgical career, you want to be a master. You should be aspirational about being very good technically. Because, I mean, I tell people, like I said last night, if you can tie your shoelaces, you can do what I do. But I think to be aspirational, that I want my results, whether I'm taking a cataract out or I'm taking a gallbladder out, I want my results to be meticulous. And I want to be really good at what I do. And all of you should be aspirational on that, yeah. So this is some of the things that I like to do. This is a brainstem cavernoma. I don't know if this will work. Yeah, this is. So there's somebody with a bleed. This is on the brainstem. Does this pointer work, or what do I have to? Okay, this. Yeah, so you can see. Oh, sorry. And you can see this is the brainstem that we're looking at. And we use the frameless stereotactic system to get there. We make an opening in the brainstem. There's the trigeminal nerve. Medical students will remember the cranial nerve that's thickest and the biggest is the trigeminal nerve, okay? And so we are now opening the brainstem itself, and we've taken the clot out, and we'll take the cavernous malformation out, yeah. So you got to remember, this is a space about 2 millimeters by 2 millimeters, and your margin for error is very little, you know. So there you see the way we call these cavernous malformations, they're like blueberries. They're like hemorrhagic vessels. And here you can see we're taking it out, yeah. And this patient actually did very well, but, and then, you know, this is something that I specialize in. I do a lot of skull base. This is a petroclival meningioma. It's probably one of the most difficult meningiomas you can take out. And this, the lady, let me just see this. Not going forward. Do I do something wrong? Yeah, here, this should play it out. Maybe I'll use this, yeah. So again, this is just, and I just want to show you surgery because it's important you guys see this. And this again is in the brainstem, and you can see we are working in between the cranial nerves. And you can tell I'm left-handed. And you can see here we go in between there. This is the pole of the tumor. But I just like to show these technical things because I think it's important. That technique is important. It's sacred, you know what I mean? And that if you go into a surgical specialty, you really want to be very good, very safe, and above all, very honest about what's happened, because you don't want to gloat and say, oh, none of this. And she did very well. We took this out. I like to show this painting. This is the Sistine Chapel. And every specialty looks at God and says, oh, there's really a heart in there. There's, you know, somebody Dinker's going to say there's really a gallbladder in God, but the neurosurgeons will tell you, oh, there's a brain out there. So I like to show this Renaissance art there. And then again, I emphasize with our residents and stuff that, you know, going into the lab and doing anatomical studies even after you've graduated are important. So we have a skull-based lab where we dissect and we publish these things about going and doing labyrinthectomies. So I think this technical virtuosity in our field is very important, okay? If you're in a surgical specialty, you want to make sure you're good, whether you're Roger Federer or Picasso or Beethoven or Rembrandt, you know, you want to be sure that your technical skill sets are really, really good. And as a young person that was here, I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And I was not blessed because I was not lucky. The only surgical case, neurosurgical case I saw here was the orthopedic department doing a laminectomy. You're blessed now. There's great neurosurgeons here. That, and, you know, I was just in Dubai, and one of your two students presented a paper there. And it was, I had a sense of pride seeing that. So we had no exposure. And so I was like, oh my God, am I going to be able to do this or not? So you always have that self-doubt, and that's okay. But I also think when we operate on this is an editorial I wrote about resisting the siren song. And I kind of, you know, Achilles, who was the great hero in the Greek Iliad, he had to choose between Kleos and Nostos. He had to choose between glory and a safe return home, and he chose glory. So sometimes we will operate on a patient, we'll have a great post-op MRI, but the result's not good. So that's where the balance needs to be there. We need to be honest about it. Here's somebody that was, 35 years old with 3 children, and she did not want any deficit. She said, my kids are little. I can't afford a deficit, yeah. So I just did a subtotal resection on her. You can see this. And then we gamma knifed the rest. And look at this. This went down. She's done really well, no problem. So, but I think this is, actually, Dinker, this is from an American College of Presidents presidential address, where he quotes Polonius' advice to son Laertes in Hamlet. And he said, this above all, to thy own self be true. It must follow as night day that thou cannot be false to any man. You have to be honest about your results. You can't sugarcoat this and say, my patients do great. No. So that transparency and that honesty is really important. And I can tell you that as a surgeon, we all have disasters. And in medicine too. If somebody tells you, I've never seen a disaster, I don't get complications, well, they're not operating enough. I operated on this girl, okay? She was a radiology technician. This is a spinal cord tumor. It took me 3 hours. We took the whole tumor out. She was paraplegic post-op. Paraplegic. And Anna Akhmatova was a great Russian poet who said, when World War I started, she said, in a single hour, we aged 100 years. Now, all surgeons know that feeling. You do something and you have a terrible result. And you're like, oh my God, what have I done here? Now, fortunately for us, 4 days later, she started moving her toes. She got everything back. But not every time we're that lucky. This is a post-op. She's done well. She had a baby 2 years later. And, you know, complications don't just happen with open surgery. This is gamma knife. This was not gamma knife, but it's a form of radiation. The New York Times reported this. People got 10 times the dose of radiation to their brainstem for trigeminal neuralgia, which is like an innocuous condition. All of them had their brainstem cooked. They were dead in 6 months. It was a terrible death. So errors happen in medicine. You got to know that. This is from the best hospital. You know, Dr. Anand Krishnan's son works here. This is from the Mass General. It's an orthopedic surgeon who operated on the wrong hand. And they had the courage to publish it. Okay, now this can happen in one of the best hospitals in the world. It can happen anywhere. Okay, so 40% of neurosurgeons and orthopedic surgeons will tell you that they've operated on the wrong level. So mistakes happen. You have to learn that, and you have to say, how can I avoid it? How can I be completely safe? It's very important. This is Czesław Miłosz, who's the Polish poet. He's in a room where people unanimously maintain a conspiracy of silence. One word of truth sounds like a pistol shot. I would urge every medical student in this auditorium to be the sound of a pistol shot. You have to confront the truth. You cannot subject yourself to the hierarchy of power and say, this is the big chairman, I can't question him. You know, you have to question that. Otherwise, none of us get better. And that's your moral obligation. And I think in the US, we've been really strict because sometimes somebody's operating on the wrong side, and the nurse will say, aren't you supposed to do this on the right side? But they'd be scared to say that. So you don't want that. You want to have that ability to say yes, I've, written a book on complications, and this was like the nightmare of lumbar disc surgery. Sometimes you get the iliac vein, and people die. So this stuff happens, and I think you have to be very cautious. And it's good to get military examples, okay, because the Army has had disasters. So if you go to New Orleans, there's a wonderful World War II museum there, and they have General Eisenhower's diary there. So on the 5th of June, before D-Day, he writes in his diary, if the invasion doesn't work tomorrow, it's not the troops' fault, it's my fault. He takes full accountability for it. And that's a lesson for all of us. If something goes wrong, don't say, well, anesthesia did this. The ICU did this. The student didn't put this in place. No. The buck stops with you, and you got to take full accountability for what happened. Now, if you're having a particularly bad day, Robert Liston used to do a amputation in 47 seconds. So he does an amputation, the patient dies. He nicks his assistant's finger, and that assistant dies. And a woman sitting in the audience gets a cardiac arrest, and she dies. So 3 people died from an operation. That's a 300% mortality, all right? So if you're having a bad day, think about this guy. It's like, oh, I'm at least 3 people undead, This is a pituitary tumor, and the reason I show this is, this happened to me 25 years ago, and we're doing a pituitary tumor here. We're just dissecting, and, we're going on Mary Way, and Dr. Gopalakrishnan will tell you this is a routine operation. Everything is done, 90% of the tumor's out. We're thinking of going home. Everything is fine, and look at the carotid. So the carotid ruptured while we were doing this. And that's a devastating complication. This patient didn't make it. But I like to show this because in the best of hands, problems will happen. What do we do when that happens, This is a great poem by Agamemnon, and I think poetry is a great balm for your soul. And Agamemnon says, God, whose law it is that he who learns must suffer. And even in our sleep, pain that cannot forget falls drop by drop upon our heart. And in our own despair against our will comes wisdom to us by the awful grace of God. Because you stay up all night saying, what did I do wrong? Why did this happen? Now, the reason I show this picture of Robert Kennedy there, when Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, Robert Kennedy was in a largely black neighborhood. They asked him, you got to get out of here. He said, no. They said, okay, we'll write a speech for you. He said, no. He said, I'm going to recite a poem that helped me through my brother's death. He had never talked about his brother's death privately, but he spoke there. And this is the poem he quoted. If you listen to the original voice, it'll make you cry. It's a beautiful piece, yeah. And I think poetry is important. Apollo, the Greek god of medicine, was also the Greek god of poetry. So I always tell you, read, John Keats, Oliver Wendell Holmes, William Cowper, they were all physicians. And, John Keats' great line, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. So I think poetry is important when you go through complications. Even if you go to the Homer in the Odyssey, he talks about craniotomy. And he says, Odysseus speared him through one temple and out the other punched the straw bones, and the dark came swirling thick across his eyes. It's a beautiful description of the brain spilling out, And of course, Shakespeare refers to the pia mater. And one of my favorite lines from Shakespeare is from The Merchant of Venice, where he says, the quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven. It blessed both he who giveth and he who receiveth. And that's what our job's all about, yeah. I will talk about the flip side of risk, which is medical malpractice, okay, at least in the West. And I think it's become more of an issue in India as well. But this has been the death of Washington. Washington's case was a classic malpractice case. They was doing bloodletting on him, and he died. He should never had that done. But that was how it starts. And, you can see in China now, the family of the death, they pay for people to come and make a scene in front of the hospital. You have to pay them off. I had a friend who was operating in Yemen, and he said, well, I said, why are you going this simple case? He said, well, I go in the morning, I do the case, I leave by the afternoon flight. I said, why? He said, in Yemen, if your patient dies, they'll come and shoot you. So the local surgeons don't want to operate on brain tumors or anything. So I think it's just something to remember, that we do have these risks. And this is against the tort system. And there's a study that showed that, how many frivolous claims happen. And neurosurgeons obviously have one of the highest malpractice things here, about 19%. And they're the top physicians for getting malpractice cases. So it's one of the sad things. I like to show these self-portraits because you have to be very honest. There's one thing you take from today's lecture, that you have to have an integrity when you take care of patients. This is Rembrandt's self-portraits, okay? You see how beautifully he shows himself aging. He doesn't Botox himself. He doesn't put a facelift on. He's getting old and he shows it. As opposed to somebody like Picasso, whose self-portraits are all over the place. And I think you need to be more like Rembrandt than like Picasso. You want to be very honest. This is what went wrong. And this is Kintsugi bowls. These are bowls from Japan. That when the bowls break, they put gold in them. And they become more valuable than the original gold. So Kintsugi bowls are like our complications. That every physician, senior physician sitting here, will not remember his triumphs as much as he remembers his failures. Those are the people that are incinerated into your limbic system. You're like, oh my God, I did that. So again, that's an important way to go. And I think professionalism is very important. It was first described as a commitment to compassion or clemency in the relief of suffering. In the United States, this has become an issue. How many of you have heard this podcast, Dr. Death? Anybody heard that? This is a young resident I actually knew, okay? And he was from Memphis, and he operated on a bunch of people. He had a drug problem. He made a couple of people paralyzed. He's like 50 years in prison in Dallas for homicide. You wouldn't think that's happening in a field like neurosurgery, but it does. And we are some of the worst people on that. We don't report well. We think, oh, we kick the can, then go to another hospital. So I think that's also very important in being professional. So now I want to talk about knowledge, a little bit of jnana, you know what I mean? That there's an old adage that goodness without knowledge is not helpful, but knowledge without goodness is dangerous, okay? And what I showed you with that neurosurgeon operating, he had knowledge, but he didn't have goodness. And we see this all the time. You operate unnecessarily on people, especially if it's a capitalistic system that you get paid for. You know, the number of surgeries go up. It's something you need to be cautious about. But I do think for all of you, I was very blessed. I picked a focus that I liked. I liked skull base. So I published on that. And I'll tell you how I was the literary and debating secretary, or how that really helped me, because I used to be the editor of Oasis. I did all this stuff, and I'm like, And it was a great journey to do. I used to go down to Tatan Chowdhury. In those days, you had to do the typesetting yourself. So I'd look at the proofs. I spent hours doing that. And then, I was like, did this really help me? Yeah, it did. Because then I said, I like medical writing. I'm going to do that. And so I wrote books and stuff. But that foundation came from JIPMER. Make no mistake about it. It was this place that was a petri dish where your creativity, your professionalism grows. You're guided by your great mentors like Dr. Chandrasekhar, all these great guys. They were so professional, they were so kind, they were so compassionate. And that left a lasting impression, because like, when I grow up, I want to be like them. I want to be a good human being that takes care of patients. So I published a lot on skull base. Is something that I really like doing. I wrote this. There's a Simpson grade system that I wrote a paper on. And lo and behold, these were all the meningiomas we took. Well, I thought Professor Simpson was dead, okay? It was like, this guy wrote the paper in 1957. And one day I get a letter from Australia. He says, I read your paper, and I enjoyed it, and, we did this paper like 50 years ago. It was really one of the high points of my career. It was a small letter that came, and I'm like, this is why we do academics. You know what I mean? That you can say, oh, geez, this makes a big difference, yeah. I tell you as students, be diverse, okay? Don't be mono-religion, just read widely, read fiction. We have a book and movie club with our residents where we put challenging books, say, okay, let's think about this. We pick movies, Message to Garcia, Diving Bell and the Butterfly. It's important to have, and I tell you, I was very lucky. When I came here, it's funny, my kids make fun of me. I was like, got into SFI, I was like communist. So I read The Grapes of Wrath, I read all the leftist literature, but it was good. It made you a better person because you think differently. I like history, so I published a lot in history. I always tell med students, if you want to start writing a paper, sometimes a simple historical topic is very good. You may be from Karnataka and you say, okay, the Hampi sculptures, I can do something on this, I can research this a little bit better, and I can get an article out. You could be from Punjab, and let's think of something different, So I always encourage that if you think of an interesting angle, basically you want to find something extraordinary in the ordinary. That's what makes a great publication. Okay, now I edit the Journal for World Federation. We're always looking for manuscripts that are different, And I want to invite all the medical students here. We're going to have a global educational summit. It'll be virtual. We're going to have big prizes for it. We have big grants for it. So I would be so proud if JIPMER is involved. It would really warm the cockles of my heart. And you know, you can be interesting. This is the causes of death in Shakespeare's plays. Okay, now you would think like, who the hell is going to read this? But I think it's a fascinating paper. You know what I mean? How many stabbings, how many poisoning, all this stuff. It's kind of interesting. So look for interesting things to write about. Then in my journey, you know, which I was joyous enough to be here and so privileged to be here, life was simple. Today I went up to Lister House. I lived in Lister House for 7 years, and I took a little selfie for my kids. And you know, it was a simple life. We were happy. 1 bedroom, used the old bathroom. We were in the library. I went to the library today. I remember studying in front of the Buddha sculpture painting. I loved that. And that's what we did. We did simple things, but our brain was working on 12 horsepowers. It was on fire. It'll never be on fire like that again for the rest of you. I guarantee you that. I was never, I thought, as smart or as porous when I was a student here. We were like a sponge. We took everything in. Gee, this angle, that angle. And that's what makes a great education. I think Dr. Das said, East is West, what is East is East, West is West, JIPMER is the best. And I really believe that, you know. So I was midlife, everybody talks about midlife crisis. I was seeing all these hypertensive hemorrhages. I was seeing these unnecessary spine surgeries. I said, okay, I'm going to take a little divergence. So I went to Harvard to do a master's in public health. I'd go every summer for 6 weeks. I'd stop my practice. I'd come back. Just a really good thing I did. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment back at Lister House all over again, you know what I mean? And so I think education is something you never stop, okay, guys? You'll never stop reading. Now, I edit a journal, and I read the entire neurosurgical literature. I know all the journals, what's come in, what's come out. So be intellectually curious, okay? And I'd ask you, read the CPC in the New England Journal of Medicine. It's an important thing to learn. Read some review in the New England Journal of Medicine. You have a case, you learn something. It's a very important way to go. I get into public health. John Snow is the guy with the cholera. I told you all the pumps where they start. And then when you look at, and people don't realize, Nightingale is really considered one of the leaders of public health because she goes to the Crimean War, and then she sees Kotari. She makes a pie chart of mortality, and that's how we get that. And public health issues, when I was here, I thought PSM was a joke, okay? I was like, oh, what are we doing this for? But it's important. So you look at obesity, and you know, it's a global problem, and you know, if Michelangelo today painted David, he'd look a little different. So there is these issues, and you know, things like drug overdose. I mean, drug overdose in the US is a big issue. All these celebrities died of that. And this was the Payne paper. If you were to read OxyContin, which 50,000 Americans die every year of OxyContin addiction, okay? It came from an article that was a letter to the editor, where they said 12,000 patients, only 4 people were addicted. It was not peer-reviewed. It was just a letter. The drug companies used this to flood America with OxyContin. It was really wrong. You know what I mean? Now, of course, they're paying for it. But these are public health issues. These are the overdoses. So here it is. Your grandmother is 92 years old. This is where I make sure of what's going on. She's 92 years old. She's got a blood clot in her temporal lobe, and she's got an aneurysm. How many of you would treat your grandmother at 92? Raise your hands. That means none of you love your grandmother. Well, maybe you do. But, you know, so she lived independently. And the family was insistent I do it. And I didn't want to do it. I did it, I clipped it in 35 minutes. She lived another 4 years. What I'm trying to tell you is we make mistakes still. Sometimes our judgment is not perfect, and you must have the humility to say, I learned something from this. I'm going to do it differently. And I think part of healthcare thing is that innovations take a long time. We knew 150 years before lemons were given to sailors, that's, you know, lack of vitamin C causes scurvy. But they didn't introduce it for 150 years, so people kept dying. And that's just the gap that happens sometimes with innovation. And then economics. If you look at the Titanic, look at all the deaths going first class, second class, third class. If you're in first class, your mortality is 39%. You're in second class, 58, third class, 70. What does it tell you? Socioeconomic impact on medicine is enormous. You know what I mean? There's an age gap between the Upper East Side of Manhattan and Harlem of 12 years. Same little island, okay? And the wealthy people live longer, and the not so wealthy people. So I think you should always be cognizant of that and look at that. But I think disruptive innovations will come up with new things. So we used to always clip aneurysms, and then we found a way to coil them. And that was a disruptive innovation. It changed medicine. When I was a student here, one of the commonest general surgery procedures was a vagotomy. Okay, we did vagotomies, and then we let Helicobacter pylori causes this, and it changed it. Do they do any vagotomies now? None, right? So it doesn't get done. So disruptive innovations happen, and medicine is full of disruptive innovations. You look at Ambrose Paré, when he treated war wounds, they used to put hot oil. He put rose water, and healing was much better. Same with Lister, carbolic acid. We have Lister House here, Nightingale, Marie Curie, Cushing, and Barry Marshall was the guy who inoculated himself with Helicobacter and gets the Nobel Prize. People laughed at him. So these innovations are good, but I think healthcare will have to get rationed. People are used to, at least in the United States, having a Cadillac pick them up. You're going to need a bus to take them. And I think it becomes an ethical issue. Are you going to save, so if you put everything into a 15-year-old who's going to live 80 years, is that worth it? And letting the 80-year-olds live 5 years? Those are important ethical decisions. I don't know the answer, but one of you in the audience is going to cure that problem. So hopefully, just to show you what happened at U.S. health dollars, it's the last 5% that use the most amount of money in healthcare. And this is one of my favorite slides. It tells you how administrators have grown and physicians are much smaller, but they control our destiny, you know. And I think medical punditry, you know, so the whole lockdown with COVID, now people are saying, was that the right thing to do? I mean, Francis Collins said, we thought all about the economy, you know, we wanted to save one life. But a whole generation of children are not going to do academically well because of COVID. And that's worldwide. Worldwide this happens. So did we sacrifice the education of children to have one patient saved? And that's the ethical dilemma, again, that we probably need to think about, yeah. So I think what I want to tell you is please be organized in your thing, whether it's a student organization, whether it's this, be organized. Take a part in it. I was very blessed to run many organizations in neurosurgery. But it's like, you know, when Lord Krishna tells Arjuna that you must do action, but you don't want fruit of it. And this is very well put in poems. Seamus Heaney was a great Irish poet, and he said, to labor and not to seek reward, okay? So you don't say, I'm going to be president of this, but I want this, I want, no. You do it non-sibi, not for yourself. Just like Chinua has done a great job with arranging for this talk and doing it. He's not, you know, this is a good thing to do, and all of you need to be involved. I'm going to start ending with talking about faith and joy. You know, so this is a poll that showed 92% of Americans believe in God, and I, you know, I talk about faith because I was very blessed. When I went into the South, and the South is lucky for me, okay? I'm from New Delhi, but I came to JIPMER, and it was a wonderful place for me. In America, I lived in Louisiana for 28 years, and I remember one of the first spinal cord tumors I operated on. This guy had no insurance, nothing. And he came back 2 months later, and he says, you know, Dr. Nanda, I just want to thank you. I pray for you every night. I'm telling my wife, this is better than anything. You know what I mean? So I think that was an amazing lesson for me. This is a young girl I operated on with a glioma, and she died a year and a half later. And I asked her before she died, a week before she came to me and was talking, and she says, I thank God for this tumor. I said, why? Like, you're dying. And she says, you know, it made me closer to God. And that faith really humbles you when you see it. I would never tell anybody that, you know, you should practice faith or whatever, but I can tell you that, like, you look at studies in nuns. If you look at studies in nuns in Italian cohorts, they don't have high blood pressure. So why is that happening? It's just something, you know, and we know that weekly attendance at religious service gives you 2 to 3 years of additional life. So, you know, last time I was in Chennai, I went to Tirupati. I'm like, I've got to add some life. You know what I mean? So I think whatever it is, I think those things make a difference, yeah. But I also think compassion is so important what we do. This is one of the best instances that I teach every medical student at our institution. And it's about Osler. Osler was in Toronto, and, you know, he took care of people there. Then he went to Penn, and he did the acronymous thing. Then when he comes to Hopkins, he goes as the Regis Professor of Medicine to Oxford. So he's giving this talk, and he goes to a small town somewhere, he gives a talk, and the woman comes up to him and said, are you Dr. Osler? Were you in Toronto? And he says, yes. He said, well, 40 years ago, you took care of my brother. He died of typhoid, and you were with him. And he said, you know, you wrote a letter, you told my parents, you said you sent a letter to my parents saying, we led Isaiah to your son, and he died a noble death. He says, no parent should see the demise of their child, but the one thing that helped them get through this was your letter. Now, Osler didn't need to write that letter, okay? He did that as an act of compassion and kindness, and that's what we should all do. You know, so it's just an important lesson to learn. And again, non-sibi, not for yourself, no matter what you do. This was the massacre that took place in Sandy Hook. And James Keenan is a Boston College theologian who said, mercy is entering into the chaos of another. All of you will spend a lifetime entering into the chaos of another. That's where you have to be compassionate. That you have to show, you know, the favorite bhajan of Gandhi was Vaishnava Jana Jo Tene Ke Jo Pir Parai Jane. True faith is feeling the pain of your fellow human beings. And that is the journey of joy, it really is. And if you look at art, this is Luke Feldis, who painted this. His own daughter died at the age of 7. But he was so impressed with the physician that took care of them that he drew this painting for that physician as a tribute. Now, you lost your daughter. Again, Christina's World, one of the famous paintings, she had muscular dystrophy. And you can see she's disabled. It looks poignant, but she couldn't walk across the field. So again, things to think about. And I think one of the saddest things is Edward Revere Osler. Osler, the Gandhi of medicine, his only son, dies in Flanders Field. And when he's being buried by Cushing, all his trainees put there. It was a really sad story, and you know, he gets a Pulitzer Prize for this book. I would urge you to read this because it's a very poignant tribute. What about your own personal health for joy and stuff, okay? This is a big issue about wellness in the United States because we have suicides among physicians that are on the rise, all right? And that's why I felt, you know, meditation and exercise is important. Take care of yourself, all right? It's important. You know, you're not going to experience joy if you're up all night studying and you're not balancing your life. You know, I remember when I was here, I would run on the road, on the main road, and there was a simple gym there, I'd work out. But those are lifelong habits, and I formed them here. So I think it's very, and you guys looked at the gym today, it was like phenomenal. I'm like, my God, there's leg press there, you have a lap pool. I want all of you swimming. Swimming, you know, just a quick point to tell you, swimming is the one exercise that improves you cognitively. So if I have important writing to do, I always go a little swim. I think it's going to spark my brain off. So try swimming, guys, just a little plug there. This was a really top-notch emergency room physician during COVID. She committed suicide. Very bright person. This happens everywhere, guys. So you have to have a life of joy with balance. You don't want to have this and say, gee, I'm not sure. So I think I'm going to end with joy. There's a great book, the dialogue between Desmond Tutu and Dalai Lama, where he says, the ultimate source of happiness is within us. We grow in kindness when our kindness is tested. And I think this is a joyous profession. For the medical students, I can tell you my highest, most important privilege, besides being a father and a husband and a son, is being a physician. That we can do so much good, that we can take care of people. This is a unique privilege. And you're about to embark on this journey, and it'll bring you immense joy. At the end of it, you're going to say, geez, I mean, I'm looking back 50 years from now, and I was studying in that library, or having tea at Gauri Medu at Tatan Chowdhury. You know, it was great experience. And, you know, some of my classmates there, these were like my brothers and sisters. And your classmates will be like your brothers and sisters. This will be a journey that enriches you, that you will enjoy. And, you know, everybody who's cynical about the time is like, oh my God, this is Steven Pinker's book. You know, you thought, okay, who are all these people? These people saved 177 million lives with the chlorination of water. Smallpox eradication, 131 million. So anytime you're feeling really good about yourself, just remind these people have done great things, you know. And I think saper dare to know is the call of the Enlightenment. And I think all of you should have that. And I think factfulness, it shows extreme poverty in the world has come down. We're living in the golden age. We really are. Things are going to get better. I operated here, I had the privilege of coming here for the skull-based meeting, and I did an acoustic neuroma live. And I can tell you, your auditorium there was better than any auditorium at LSU or Rutgers. So this is a great medical school. You know what I mean? That you have enormous facilities for great progress. And that's why we expect great things from you. You know what I mean? To whom much is given, much is expected. You belong to an elite. You belong to one of the best medical schools in the world, okay? You're going to get a great education, and we expect you to do great things with that. We don't expect you to say, oh, geez, I tried. No, we want you to be aspirational. We want you to say, I'm going to do great things, and I want you to be ambitious, This is one of my favorite poems. William Wordsworth says, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. That's how I feel about neurosurgery. I love neurosurgery. I can't believe they pay me to do it. Okay? Every time I go to the operating room, I'm like, oh my God, this is such a great privilege. And that's how you need to feel. But you must be humble. This is uncertainty. Never have an element of toxic doubtlessness. I'm the only way, I know what's right. And this is again from John Keats. This is a New England Journal of Medicine about tolerating uncertainty. You need to have that. And you think you're I'm a great person, I've done all this stuff. Medicine makes it. This is a strike in Jerusalem in 1983, and the doctors were out for 4 months. Guess what happened to the mortality rate in Israel? You would think it would have gone up. It actually went down. So whenever you think, oh my God, I'm making a difference, maybe you're being over-aggressive. You know what I mean? They did a study on looking at cardiologists when they left town. Cardiac mortality went down. So maybe they were doing risky things. So just something to think about, yeah. I got to put a little surgical plug before my last few slides. So they did a study on internists, and they shed 30 to 40, 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 and above, okay? With every 10 years in internists, your mortality goes up just a touch, like 1%, 2%, a little bit. With surgeons, it flips completely. If you're over 60, you have the best results. I happen to be over 60. But the reason is your muscle memory and your judgment comes in. So you don't operate on everything. So I just thought that was interesting. And I'll end with the last few slides here. Half of what we teach here is wrong. Unfortunately, we don't know which half. And you as medical students need to know that. You need to say, gee, I can figure this out, yeah. So this is me. I put this collage with my help of my wife. This is me when I was at St. Columbus. Dinker and I were both from St. Columbus in New Delhi. This is on top of Lister House. I was the literary and debating secretary. And I think in Chennai, I won the national debating contest. And you'd say, well, what's the deal? Why do you want to do it? Well, it helps you become a good public speaker. I was the literary and debating secretary. I did the Oasis. I would go to Taran Chowdhury, put the typescripts in. I'd get short stories from the ashram, from Manoj Das. We'd go to an artist in Chennai, put his art on. We try to make it interesting. And you would think, well, it really helped me. It did. It helped me become a writer. It helped me put out books in neurosurgery, publish a lot. And it started from the Literary and Debating Society. So I was very blessed. I think those of you who have that opportunity, take care of it. I'll end with this because I want to put a plug in for compassion. These are the first recorded murders in history, besides Abel and Cain in the Bible. These are 1960 Sahaba. 13,000 years ago, they found like 30 people murdered there. But compassion starts. When Margaret Mead was asked, when does civilization start? And she says it starts in the year 15,000 years ago because there was a fractured femur. And what they said is that you cannot heal unless somebody takes care of you for 6 weeks. So this is the first time we see human compassion. And that's what really defines us. And I told you about that. So this is a young girl that I operate on, 6 years old. She was quadriplegic with this AVM, with a high blood clot. You can see that there. Small AVM there. I took it out. She did really well. And she was Hispanic. And I remember what her mother told me the night before. She just looked me in the eye and said, this is the most precious thing in the world for me. Never forget that. The people that you take care of are the most precious people in the world for their sons, for their husbands. That's the humanity of what we practice. That's what gives us joy, and that's what we all aspire for. This is Da Vinci and Verrocchio. Verrocchio was his teacher, okay? And Verrocchio realized when he painted this that Leonardo's angel was better. So the teacher realized that my pupil is going to outshine me. My hope is that all of you outshine us. That 50 years from now, you guys come and give a talk here because you've changed the world. That is your goal, that is your focus, and don't take it lightly. So this is Michelangelo on his deathbed. He says, I'm still learning. Ancaro imparo. So keep learning. He was 83 when he was dying. And I think in the end, this is all about humility. This is what Andros Paré said. In French, je le pensais du la gare, and I do admit I missed all my French classes. It was mandatory then. But it says, I did the dressing and God did the healing. And again, it's a joyous, joyous profession. I hope you learn all the jnana you need to be good. It's been a unique privilege to address you, and I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you very much. Yeah.